Sometimes in order to understand the issues in our current marriage, we need to look back at our parents' marriage, the marriage that we got to watch every day, all day, for a long period of time, and be able to understand how that impacts our current relationship. Think about it. In a previous video, I just discussed the concepts of fighting, dishonesty and cheating, feeling unfulfilled, and disappointment. And in today's video, I want to deep dive into some other concepts, some things that might have taken place when you were growing up in the family dynamic, and understanding that and seeing, is it happening in your marriage right now? Are these aspects of your marriage? And let's deep dive into that. So let's take the first option right now that I think is very interesting, is spending lots of time with the children and not spending time with each other. Okay, so you're spending all this time with the children, but you're really not interacting with each other. It's about the kids going to soccer. It's about the kids going to karate. It's about your daughter doing cheerleader practice. It's about taking the kids to, track meets and cross-country meets and doing all these things. And really, honestly, there's not a lot of talking between you two, but there's a lot of interacting with the kiddos. And you might have seen this when you were growing up as well. Maybe your parents, there was a lot of distance, there's little walls built up, and next thing you know, you become the center of attention, right? You are the end-all, be-all to life's existence. But see, remember also too, and you might have not have seen all this, but when you were leaving to go to school or moving out, they became what? Empty nesters. And a lot of times when somebody becomes an empty nester, after you have been the center of their universe, what happens? They begin to question their entire reality. What are we doing here? What's going on? What happened? What happened to our marriage? What happened to our family? Have I ever really loved this person? Do I get along with this person? Do I even know them? And you see that a lot in marriages, and you might be dealing with the same thing, because if you were the center of attention growing up, you might be doing the same thing in your marriage, where your kids, not that they shouldn't be the center of attention, but maybe even too much the center of attention. Now, you could have gone the opposite way and said, well, my kids are not going to run my life, and I got to try to work on my marriage and do this stuff. But I think a lot of times we feel like we have to take care of the kids, but also the kids give us a buffer. Right? It gives us a buffer where we don't have to have that conversation, where those, uncomfortable times kind of go away, because we can focus on what Jimmy's doing or what Sarah's doing. We don't have to really think about, oh, look how cute she is, or, oh, let's watch this recital, or whatever it looks like. You don't have to have those conversations anymore, because the kids dominate everything. And it works because it takes the spotlight off you too. So that's one of the big concepts I want you to think about, because if that's happening right now, eventually, if they move out, if they get married, if they go to school, they're not going to be around anymore, at least not every day. And that's going to put a lot of strain on the relationship, because there hasn't been a lot of work on the relationship, because there hasn't been a lot of communication outside of what the kiddo's doing, how the kiddo's doing, and what we need to do for the kid next. Another concept I think is interesting, and this might have been something that you saw with your parents, is that the fun went away. When you were growing up, maybe when you were young, your parents would laugh and joke and kid around together and have a good time. But eventually, over time, as you got older, it seemed like your parents were constantly, kind of at each other's throats or annoyed with one another. But there definitely wasn't a lot of smiles and laughter. And I think that sometimes we look at that and eventually mimic that in our own relationships, our current relationships, because we don't think about it anymore. Because, well, it worked for mom and dad. They were married for 35 years, or they were married for 40 years, or whatever. And you kind of like write off all the things that weren't working because of this 40-year, mark. Wow, 40 years. But think about that. They stopped having fun. In your own marriage, have you stopped having fun with your spouse? I see a lot of folks that work with me where they have fun with their girlfriends, the wife has fun with her girlfriends, the guy has fun with his guy friends, but they're not having fun together anymore. So how do we work on that too? Because fundamentally, in any friendship, in any relationship, there's got to be some fun. And so how do we let that get to that point? And when did it start that way? When did the fun end and all the serious began? When did that happen? And I want you to really think about that, because there was a time, I'm sure, where you did have fun. And then over a period of time, it began to wane and change. And now there's not so much fun. And I think that we learn that as well, too, that that's okay, that's acceptable. But is that really okay, or is that just going through the motions? We're married for marriage's sake. We're married because we're married, and we're going to keep the sanctity of marriage, and we're going to do everything, and we're going to stay married no matter what. And we really got to understand, when did the fun leave, and why did the fun leave? And the last piece that I want to cover in this particular video, we have another video after this that we're going to deep dive into more concepts. But one parent was always not home. They were always on the road, or they were always out, or they were always doing something. And we realized that one parent was around, but one parent wasn't. And it's not something that you really think about. At first, maybe you're a little lonely that mom or dad's not home, but then eventually that becomes commonplace, right? That just becomes normal. Dad's always, on the road for work, or dad always is late night at work, or mom, has to work late hours, or mom's going out with her friends, or dad's going out with his friends. And so there's this constant void of one person that's not really around. And, at first you're upset, but then you kind of let it go. But I think that also becomes a learned concept too, is that when we get older and we get in a relationship of our own, it's acceptable maybe that one person's not around, or it's acceptable that we're not around that much. Maybe we choose to go out a lot, or we choose to work really late hours, or do what we want. And sometimes that's because we have to, but sometimes that can be because we want to, because we want to have distance, because we don't want to be around that much, because we don't want to have the conversations. Because, and because when you think about it, a lot of times we do things to avoid the big conversations. Like if we're constantly getting home late at night and we know that our spouse is going to already be in bed, we don't have to have conversations. And in the morning, maybe you sleep in or they sleep in, and then you don't really conversate in the morning either. So it's kind of like two ships passing in the dark and everything's fine and nobody ever has the big conversations. But how do we move the relationship forward in a positive way? How can you in that type of dynamic? And I think that when we saw that probably growing up, we took that as well. That's what marriage is. But now as you look at your own marriage, there's a lot of things that we choose to do, and there's a lot of things that people choose to do because of patterns and learned responses, but also there's a lot of things that people choose to do because they don't have another way out. They don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to have that conversation, and they'd rather just avoid it at all costs, no matter what the stakes are, just so that they don't have to have it. And I think a lot of it's just that fear of speaking one's truth. I think that some of us might be more codependent in nature and worry how the other person's going to feel. I also feel sometimes too we're worried about hurting the other person's feelings, but also don't understand how do you initially make these changes? How do we turn this big ship around after all these years and begin to consciously make these changes in our day-to-day life in a positive way where we can begin to make things work again? If you haven't already, please give us a thumbs up on this video, and in the comment section let me know, do you currently use your kids as a buffer in your marriage? Because I think it's a normal go-to response. This isn't some wacky response. This is what a lot of people do because it just kind of becomes commonplace because we have to focus on them anyway. You had them. They're a lot of work, but then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can kind of refocus my energy and not have to focus on the elephant in the room or the issue I have to talk to about my wife or husband. Let's really focus on the kid and what the kid needs. And so if you've fallen into that trap and you feel like you're in there, I'd love to hear from you and any sort of remedies that you're taking or just kind of where you feel like you're right now, how you feel like it is, and if you feel like it's just overwhelming to try to make that change. Also, I have many videos on marriage and the roommate situation, how to identify the roommate situation, and how to rectify the roommate situation. And those can be interesting videos too if you're married and needing some answers. In the meantime, don't forget to live your true life.